Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is arguably one of the most legendary pieces of public speaking in modern history, Steve Jobs' 2005 Stanford commencement speech. Think about it. It's just a 15-minute speech. He delivered it only a year after receiving a devastating cancer diagnosis, yet it's an absolute masterpiece. I mean, it's racked up over 43 million views on Stanford's YouTube channel alone, and its impact honestly hasn't faded one bit. But you've got to wonder, why? What makes this specific speech so sticky, so emotional, and just so universally relatable? Well, today, we are going to decode the invisible architecture right behind his words. To figure this out, we're actually blending two really fascinating sources today. The first is a highly practical speaker coaching blog by communication expert Rosemary Ravenel. She breaks down the really accessible, surface-level storytelling tactics he used. The second is this deeply rigorous, peer-reviewed academic paper published in the Journal of Business Research by Loises Heraclius and Laura Alexa Claring. And they basically take a magnifying glass to the subconscious rhetorical devices and psychological mind tricks Jobs employed. It's a really cool mix of the practical and the profound.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the anatomy of a masterpiece to set the stage. Then we'll look at the 3 stories and 4 themes on the surface. After that, we'll dive deep into the subconscious code with rhetorical identification, followed by puzzles and enthymemes and the circle of life. Finally, we'll wrap up with your communication takeaways. Starting off with Section 1, Anatomy of a Masterpiece, setting the stage. Before we even look at the words, we really have to look at the context. Here is Jobs, an iconic billionaire CEO, stepping onto the stage right in the middle of a battle with cancer. But he projects this completely unvarnished, almost raw presence. His very first words were simply, "I am honored to be with you today." He immediately elevates the graduates and then drops a self-deprecating joke about his own lack of a college degree. It establishes this instant, humble rapport. And that humility, it paves the way for the audience to lower their defenses so they're actually ready to absorb his deeper messages. Moving into Section 2, 3 stories, 4 themes. This is the surface layer.
This first layer of our analysis comes from Rosemary Ravenel's framework. What makes this speech so brilliant is, honestly, its accessibility. Jobs didn't get up there and overwhelm the audience with complex philosophy. He just gave them a perfectly organized 3-act autobiography. First, connecting the dots. Second, love and loss. And third, death. And between these chapters, he took these very long, very deliberate pauses, which made it literally impossible to lose the narrative thread. Now, if we cross-reference those 3 stories with Ravenel's underlying themes, we see an absolute masterclass in human values. Connecting the dots delivers a powerful lesson in authenticity and purpose. Trusting your gut, even when the path is totally unclear. Love and loss is this raw demonstration of resilience in the face of very public failure. And confronting mortality is, of course, the ultimate lesson in courage. Every single story serves as a perfectly packaged vehicle for these massive universal themes. All right, Section 3, the secret, rhetorical identification, the subconscious code. This is where we shift from that practical structure over to our academic analysis, and we find the hidden mind tricks of Kenneth Burke's new rhetoric. In this framework, the ultimate goal isn't just persuasion, it's identification. This is why the speaker and the audience become consubstantial. Fancy word, right? It basically means sharing such deep common ground that you essentially operate as one entity. Jobs subconsciously aligned his identity so tightly with those Stanford graduates that his advice just felt like their own internal realizations. So how did he actually build that identification? He used 2 key methods. First up is common ground. He really leaned into their shared entrepreneurial dreams in Silicon Valley. But the second method is even more clever, antithesis, which is basically uniting against a shared enemy. Jobs casually drops a joke about how Windows just copied the Mac, and instantly, boom, he creates an us versus them dynamic. He and the audience were the bold, creative innovators, and Microsoft was the boring, unoriginal enemy. It's a wildly effective subconscious bonding tactic. On to Section 4, puzzles and enthymemes, engaging the audience's brain. If you want an audience to remember what you're saying, you actually have to make their brains do a little bit of the work. Jobs did this using enthymemes. Think of these as narrative puzzles with a missing piece that absolutely forced the audience to lean in. Here's the exact puzzle he introduced right away. He stands in front of thousands of elite college graduates and humorously points out he never actually got a degree. So the unspoken question just hanging in the air is simple. How in the world did Jobs become so successful without one? This enthymeme forces the audience to resolve the puzzle in real time. Let's walk through it.
Step 1. Jobs states he dropped out. Step 2. The audience assumes that, generally, successful leaders don't drop out. Step 3. The audience naturally concludes that Jobs must be this rare, special exception. By allowing them to connect those dots and deduce it themselves, they believe it infinitely more than if he had just flat out said, "I'm a special exception." Section 5. The Circle of Life. Root Metaphors. Let's peel back the final layer of the onion here. Jobs used root metaphors, not just to sound poetic, but as structural anchors for the audience's emotional journey. First, life is a journey. He talks about dots connecting down the road. Next, work is love. When he describes being publicly fired from Apple at age 30, he doesn't just call it a career setback. He frames it like a heartbreaking romantic breakup, telling the crowd he was still in love with the work. Finally, good is up, bad is down. He talks about dropping the baton versus Apple growing into a $2 billion company. These metaphors just speak so directly to our embodied human experience. But the massive, overarching metaphor of the entire speech is symbolic death and rebirth. The academic analysis shows how the speech constantly, rhythmically, cycles through this. Getting fired from Apple, a symbolic death, which actually freed him to enter his most creative period, a rebirth. Facing cancer, a literal brush with death, which he frames as life's change agent that clears out the old to make way for the new. The entire structure of the speech mimics the natural, unavoidable circle of life, which is why it resonates on the deepest possible human level. Finally, Section 6, your communication takeaways. Applying the code. Okay, so what does this mean for us? You don't have to be Steve Jobs to use these tools in your own daily communication. Just keep this quick checklist in mind. First, use a simple 3-act structure. Give your stories clear boundaries. Second, build that deep identification by finding common ground or even a shared adversary so you become consubstantial with your listeners. Third, create puzzles with enthymemes so their brains have to lean in and do some of the work. And fourth, anchor your abstract ideas with grounded root metaphors like work is love or life is a journey to make them visceral. Now, we absolutely cannot end this explainer without acknowledging how Jobs actually ended his speech. He closed with a perfectly crafted piece of advice borrowed from the back cover of the Counterculture Whole Earth catalog. Stay hungry, stay foolish. It was this incredible call to maintain your curiosity and your willingness to take risks. It was the ultimate memorable sign-off that permanently cemented his message of following your heart no matter what. Which brings us to our final thought. The very next time you have to persuade, inspire, or simply present information to a group of people, take a hard look at your content and ask yourself this: are you just speaking to your audience, or are you connecting the dots with them? By tapping into the invisible code we've unpacked today, you can transform a standard presentation into an experience they literally won't forget. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.